Boy, you got that right, PC. It's a tough life for a nurse from an enema shop out here. That's right. Sometimes you just have to clutch onto the best ship that passes you by and make it work. You know what I mean? You just gotta put on your best pencil dress and cinch that waist as much as possible with the thinnest of belts and do that 50s hairstyle thing with the big curl in the front of your head. You know what I mean. Amen, brother.
Well, hey there, look at all you Enemaniacs out there looking good and healthy and ready for a new episode of B-Movie Enema the series. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and I'm joined as always by Nurse Disembody.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Nurse, and down here, under my desk, is the great B-Movie Poop Shoot. Shit yeah, Poop Shoot. Shit yeah. Oh, and it looks like he's got this week's movie, Nurse, so why don't you entertain the peoples while I go get the movie?
How's it going, everyone?
All right.
Oh, thank God.
Did you have a good conversation with the audience?
Sure.
Swell. So this week's movie is Private Hell 36. Now, you might look at that title and think, well, that kind of sounds like a war movie, and barring any image or cursory review of the synopsis, I would have agreed with you, but there's just something about the title, the Army-style font, but, yeah, you know, it just kind of feels like a war flick. But if you notice the primary thing that's staring you down on the poster, you realize quickly that is a dame, and dames don't fight no wars back in 1954.
And what a dame she is.
Indeed, this is Ida Lupino. We'll talk a little bit more about her later, but what we have here is a crime noir film. It's one that I also think is kind of interesting, and we'll talk a lot about that later, too.
Is there anything we'll talk about now? I feel like you're dodging a conversation like you do when I ask for a raise.
Oh, would you look at the time? I'm sorry, Nurse. I would love to talk about possible raises and stuff, but I got a movie to talk about.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, the movie has all sorts of key people associated with it. It's directed by Don Siegel. Now, Siegel was born in Chicago in 1912, and while he was born into a Jewish family, when he graduated from college, it was from Jesus College, which is part of Cambridge in England. Actually, you know the full name of the Jesus College, Nurse?
I assume it's the College of the Blessed Virgin Mary, St. John the Evangelist, and the Glorious Virgin St. Radegund near Cambridge?
Yeah. It is.
I thought it was. It's pretty obvious.
Okay, anyway, Siegel also got some education from Beaux Arts de Paris. Eventually, Siegel went to Los Angeles and got work with Warner Brothers in their film library. From there, he became the head of the montage department at Warner and ended up directing thousands of montages. However, what really launched his feature film career wasn't his montage work, but his work in short subject directing. In 1945, Siegel made two shorts, the short drama Star in the Night and the short documentary Hitler Lives. Both won the short subject categories at the 18th Academy Awards in 1946. So right out of the gate, even before he stepped onto a feature film set to direct a movie, he directed the opening montage sequence for the 1942 Best Picture winner Casablanca, and he directed the 1945 Best Live Action Short winner and the 1945 Best Documentary Short Subject winner. His first feature was 1946's The Verdict, starring Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre, who were both in Casablanca. The leading lady from The Verdict was Joan Loring. Loring was nominated for Best Supporting Actress the year prior when she played Bessie in The Corn is Green. So I think it's safe to say Siegel was working with a pretty solid cast right out of the gate, and he already came with some prestige. Now, while some of Siegel's work is somewhat unrecognizable by title, as his career continued on, he started to pile up some pretty dang recognizable titles. 2 years after making Private Hell 36, Siegel made one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Later, Siegel made an Elvis movie. He then directed Steve McQueen in Hell is for Heroes, before making the highly appreciated The Killer, starring the great Lee Marvin. But it was Siegel's partnership with Clint Eastwood that brought some of Eastwood's most iconic movies to the screen, and they were mostly all very well received and pretty big box office hits. The first was 1968's Coogan's Bluff. Then, a couple of years later, he made 3 films with Eastwood in 1970 and 71. These were Two Mules for Sister Sarah, The Beguiled, and the big one, Dirty Harry. While Eastwood was always a star going back to when he was on TV's Rawhide, Dirty Harry made him a superstar. To this day, the character of Harry Callahan is quotable as all get out.
You're out of bullets, and you know what that means. You gotta reload, Buster. Opinions are like assholes. Everyone's an asshole.
That's not...
You've gotta ask yourself a question. Do I feel pretty? Well, do you, Jeff?
What?
Go ahead. Make my sandwich.
Okay, we're done with that.
It's a hell of a thing, killing a man. You take away all he's got and everything he's ever gonna have.
That was actually a correct Eastwood line, but it's not from Dirty Harry. That's from Unforgiven, which was dedicated to the recently departed Don Siegel. The 5th and final film Siegel made with Eastwood was Escape from Alcatraz, another Eastwood classic that was also thought of as one of the best films of 1979 and a box office hit. In between making Dirty Harry and Escape from Alcatraz, Siegel worked with Walter Matthau and Michael Caine. He then directed the final John Wayne movie, The Shootist. He also made the Charles Bronson spy flick Telephone, which co-starred Donald Pleasance, and had a script co-written by Peter Hyams. Siegel's final film was Jinxed. Well, maybe both the title and the production itself were jinxed. That's kind of a bad joke. That starred Bette Midler. Siegel suffered a heart attack while the film was in production, and he retired from filmmaking. Siegel passed away in 1991 from cancer while married to Carol Rydall, who used to be a secretary of Clint Eastwood. I bring up Jinx because he hired another friend of his to do second unit work, Sam Peckinpah. Peckinpah worked on Riot in Cell Block 11 for Siegel, and then on this film as a dialogue director. Peckinpah's work on Jinxed helped him get his final film a year later, The Osterman Weekend, starring Rutger Hauer, Burt Lancaster, and Dennis Hopper. But let's get rolling on Private Hell 36, and I'll help Nurse Disembodied brush up on her Clint Eastwood movie quotes.
There's 2 kind of people, my friend. Those with loaded buns and those who have dogs. You dig?
Okay, so the story of Private Hell 36 takes place in Los Angeles, but it doesn't truly begin there. The movie opens with a pre-title sequence that takes place in New York City, a year before the events of the main plot of this movie. We see a dead man in an elevator and another man dressed as a doorman, elevator operator, walking away with a case. According to our narrator, it was a crime that started growing cold.
Leave it to New York City to make it Los Angeles' problem.
That's right. I like how this movie starts with the narrator. It's very similar to popular crime shows of the era. In fact, Lily Marlowe even name drops Dragnet when she's getting grilled by Cal in the nightclub. And I think when we talk about our leading lady and our writer in the next segment, there are some ties to, like cop dramas as far as something that will come up later for one of the writers. But I digress. As the story picks up 1 year after the unsolved crime in New York City, we go to Los Angeles, and we meet Detective Cal Bruner, who sees some hubbub going on at a pharmacy, and this leads to a skirmish with a transient that Cal arrests. On the person of that transient is a $50 bill that was passed to the pharmacist, who filled some prescriptions for a man with gallbladder issues, and he paid with that bill.
Isn't all this kind of convoluted? I mean, there's a $50 bill that was used to get prescriptions, and he got the bill from a guy at a bar, and it all has to do with the elevator homicide in New York? It seems like a lot to get this movie's plot going.
Yeah, I don't fully disagree with you that the movie does kind of start convoluted. Thankfully, it passes quickly. But basically, yes, the $50 bill is indeed identified as one of the bills that was part of the New York crime. Pretty much from there, it's kind of straightforward. We need to figure out where that bill came from and who made the original purchase that had that bill. So it's off to the nightclub, and here the boys meet Lily Marlowe.
Lily Marlowe is such a cool name. Sounds mysterious and like a femme fatale.
Yeah, it does. I like that it's not her real name, and we're not going to really find out what her real name was. That gets played off in a fairly clever way, with Lily saying it's been so long ago that she doesn't remember her real name.
She's got spunk.
So let's talk about our two detectives on the case for the LAPD. The first one we meet, like I said, is Cal Bruner, played by Steve Cochran. Cochran has a kind of unfortunate story. While he does have a star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame, there aren't a ton of movies on his filmography that are terribly recognizable today. However, he did work in a couple of films with Danny Kaye and Virginia Mayo. He had a movie with Jimmy Cagney. He was in the 1946 Best Picture, The Best Years of Our Lives, which also won Frederick March his second Oscar. It was one of the very first movies selected for the Library of Congress in 1989 for preservation. It was almost as if Cochran was just created for film noir roles like this movie. He starred in others like Slander, I, Mobster, Inside the Walls of Folsom Prison, and Tomorrow is Another Day. But things take a dark turn for Cochran when it became very well known that he was a big-time womanizer. This brought a ton of tabloid attention to him, and prior to this film's release, Cochran was often in trouble with the police and supposedly was arrested for assault and reckless driving. The tale of Cochran's death is truly bizarre. In June 1965, he went on a sailing trip from Acapulco to Costa Rica. He brought with him 3 young women to accompany him on his trip. He had been married to Jonah Jensen, but I'm not sure if they were still married at the time. But none of those 3 girls with him on the boat were Jensen. But anyway, while on this trip, Cochran fell ill with an acute lung infection. He died 2 days later. The boat went adrift with the 3 girls on board, not knowing how to sail the boat, and his dead body was decomposing the whole time. It would be 10 days before they were rescued off the coast of Guatemala.
Oh my god, that sounds awful and kind of spooky.
Right?
10 days of being stuck on a boat you have no idea how to drive or where you are, and there's a guy's bloated, rotting corpse just right over there stinking up the place?
Yeah, it's awful. With his second wife, Florence Lockwood, they had a daughter who would then become the mother of TV producer Alex Johns, who was the co-executive producer of Futurama for over 70 episodes. It's also said that the singer Stephen Morrissey, you know that guy, Nurse?
Is he the guy from the 80s who sang all the mopey songs, who maybe has a lot of really iffy opinions on all sorts of stuff?
Yeah, that's the guy. Anyway, he claims his parents named him Stephen because of Steve Cochran.
Well, I guess that's something.
Hey, I just wanted to bring that up from what I read on the Wikipedia. But, alright, the older cop of the two, Jack Farnham, is played by Howard Duff. Now, Jack at least comes across as the much more grounded and professional of the two cops. He seems fairly level-headed. He's the one married with a kid. In fact, Jack's wife, Francie, is played by Dorothy Malone. Malone was already a veteran of film. She would go on to win the 1956 Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her role as Mary Lee Hadley in Written on the Wind. She would get a pretty significant role as Constance McKenzie in Peyton Place, a role that she would have for 342 episodes before leaving. In the late 70s, Malone would be in the movies The Day Time Ended and Good Luck Miss Wyckoff. Finally, in 1992, Malone's final film role was as Hazel Dobkins in Basic Instinct.
Was she the lady who did the leg crossing thing in that movie?
No. However, I guess if she wanted to do that in this movie, I'd be cool with that. Anyway, back to Howard Duff. Between 1946 and 1950, Duff played Sam Spade on the radio series The Adventures of Sam Spade. During this time, he also had a contract with Universal Pictures. One of the movies he appeared in thanks to that contract was 1948's The Naked City. That movie won a couple of Oscars for cinematography and editing and inspired the 1958 TV series. By 1954, he was working as a freelance actor. Duff worked for a very long time. Even in the 80s, he was still getting roles in movies like Oh God Book 2, Monster in the Closet, and No Way Out. Duff also played the role of Dustin Hoffman's divorce attorney, John Shaughnessy, in the Oscar-winning film Kramer vs. Kramer. His final film, Too Much Sun, directed by Robert Downey Sr. and starring Robert Downey Jr., was released the same year he passed away from a heart attack, 1990. But Duff was a staunch Democrat, and this also might have gotten him listed as a communist subversive in the Red Channels Journal in the early 50s. And while he lost his radio job, which was the reason why he stopped playing Sam Spade, he nearly lost his entire acting career, if not for his marriage. We'll talk more about that in the next segment because there's all sorts of interesting relationship stuff in this movie.
Ooh, it's time for us to serve some tea. Jeff, how many days in a row do you think Cal, Lily, and Jack had to go to the racetrack to find this guy with the mustache who gave Lily the $50 bill?
I don't know, but it seems like a lot.
It got to the point where I kind of forgot they were actually cops doing a job. I just thought they became track rats or something.
No doubt. We need to talk about the star of this movie, Ida Lupino. I think Ida Lupino is not only very attractive and interesting as an actress, but she's also a very important figure in filmmaking, and I'm not sure she gets enough credit for that. Lupino is actually a Brit. She was born in London in 1918. Her mother, Connie, was an actress, and her father was a comedian. In fact, she comes from a theatrical family. They were one of the greatest performing families in history, actually. Interestingly, Ida didn't love being an actress at first. She only went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art to please her father. Probably part of why she didn't love acting was that she was almost always given bad girl roles early on. This means she played a lot of prostitutes in those early roles, but still, it's hard to deny that Lupino has a sultry appearance. This proved to be something of a point of consternation for studios when she arrived in Hollywood. She eventually became a contract player at Warner Brothers, but it was not a happy situation for her. Most of that time in her contracted years was spent being suspended by Jack Warner personally. You see, Lupino would refuse roles that were assigned to her because she often felt what was being assigned to her was beneath her dignity, or she'd get in trouble for making script revisions for her characters. One such instance that led to a suspension was that she had a chance to appear opposite Ronald Reagan in King's Row, but she turned that down flat.
Well, she was a lifelong Democrat, so...
Very true, but once she left Warner, she eventually found her way to the company that made this film, Filmmakers. In 1949, she stepped in as director on Not Wanted, which was a movie about an unwed pregnancy. She was not credited and was only filling in for Elmer Clifton, who fell ill. Then she directed and co-wrote Never Fear, which was sort of based on her own battle with polio, which ran rampant in Hollywood in the 40s. That same year, in 1950, she made one of the very first films about rape, Outrage. In 1953, she made the noir drama The Bigamist, co-starring Joan Fontaine, as well as the noir thriller The Hitchhiker. The latter of those 1953 films she directed would not only mark the first film noir thriller to be directed by a woman, but also it was selected to be preserved in the Library of Congress. One thing you might notice if you go into the synopsis of those movies is that these movies are either melodramas about taboo topics or like kind of gritty noir and crime thrillers. This places Ida Lupino squarely in the proto-feminism movement in filmmaking. Martin Scorsese is a big fan of Lupino and has talked in great detail about her stripped-down style as both an actress and director, basically stating she had no taste for glamour. These were almost the opposite of what you'd expect to see in movies during this period. These are not glamorous or beautiful people leading larger-than-life lives. They were more average people rocked by trauma or what have you. Lupino herself hated the idea of commodifying female stars. She didn't want to be an object of desire, even though her good looks and her approach to acting was, as something of a naturalist. I mean, she knew that the more she leaned into commodifying those looks and an attitude of sexiness in her persona, that would be the moment her career would begin dying, and it wouldn't last very long. And her career lasted 47 years.
So I guess you could say she avoided those traps she spoke out against.
Yeah, most definitely. But let's talk about the writer. Nurse, do you happen to know who Collier Young is?
I'm thinking he's a guy named Collier Young.
Well, hey, you're right about that.
Well, how about that? See, I am the smart one around here.
Collier Young was born in 1908 and didn't get into film until 1948. He started off as an advertiser, and according to his Wikipedia page, it seems as though he lived in Indianapolis about 10 years before his movie career began. Later on in his career, Young created the series Ironside, starring Raymond Burr, and he was also the producer of 88 episodes of One Step Beyond and an executive producer on the revival series The Next Step Beyond in the late 70s. But nurse, let's get the tea out so we can spill it.
Finally, I'm over here ready to get to the good stuff you promised last segment, and you're over there talking Steps Beyond and Ironsides and bullcrap.
Well, the wait is over. In 1948, Collier Young married Ida Lupino. Several of Lupino's directing and writing work was closely connected to Young. Either he wrote the scripts she directed, or they co-wrote scripts, Private Hell 36 included. But where things get interesting is they divorced in 1951.
Wait, but wasn't this movie 1954?
Yep.
And they were still working together, or was this some sort of old script that they wrote when they were together?
Nope. They continued to work together even after they divorced and moved on with new spouses for years. In fact, Young would be the executive producer on the show Mr. Adams and Eve that co-starred Lupino. And at the time of making this movie, Collier Young had married Joan Fontaine.
Wait, didn't you say that Ida Lupino directed the movie with Joan Fontaine in it?
Yeah, I sure did. The bigamist co-starred Lupino and Fontaine, with Lupino directing a script by Collier Young.
I bet that was uncomfortable.
I don't know. It seemed as though Lupino and Young had a very good relationship post-marriage. Oh, and I should mention that TV show Young executive produced Mr. Adams and Eve.
Yeah?
Yeah, that co-starred Ida Lupino's subsequent husband, Howard Duff.
Wait, isn't Howard Duff in this movie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lupino and Duff married the very same year she and Collier Young split, 1951. They remained married for 33 years.
Well, isn't this set quite the incestual web?
Indeed it is.
I must say, that little inside scoop did not disappoint.
Good. I think we need to get into the final act of Private Hell 36. If you thought things were starting to get a little tense now that Cal has taken money from the guy who was in on the original crime in New York City and forcing Jack to go along with the plan of keeping the money, things are about to get a lot more uncomfortable for our detective friends as they start to struggle with what's been done. And so there we have it. What began as the allure of a woman that Cal wanted to desperately possess leads to a split-second decision that then leads to a rift between two partners that leads to ultimate betrayal and death. I personally think this is a pretty damn good movie. Sure, there are things about the movie that places it squarely of its time, like Lily seemingly tough and determined to have her life her way, only for her to kind of comfortably slide into the rugged Cal's arms and continues to want to be with him even after the more or less calls her a whore and slaps her. Yeah, it's definitely something that is an unfortunate part that maybe betrays her character's strength, but I was getting the impression that she knew that maybe Cal wasn't entirely on the up and up anyway, especially in their final exchange, but I kind of have to give it a pass for 1954. Ida Lupino is really good in this. I get why Cal is attracted to her. She's an attractive character. She plays it fairly straight, too. She seems like a nightclub singer and what you would expect a lot of independent women in the mid-50s to act and talk like. She has a sexuality about her that doesn't beat you over the head. She's cool and confident, and that's where her sexiness really comes from. Meanwhile, you get a lot of what to expect from Cal and Jack from the early scenes. Cal is kind of a tempest. He acts first, and he thinks and puzzles through things later, and that was apparent in the opening scene. He doesn't even think twice about seeing what's going on in the pharmacy. The moment he sees all the money in that lockbox that he and Jack find, he stuffs the money and then has to leave Jack for an hour or so while he has to then try to figure out where to stash the money for safety. And what's more is he's acting on his base desires. He knows what Lily wants, which is some sense of wealth and glamour, or whatever that means to her. She talks about wanting a diamond bracelet, so he figures that is exactly what she needs, and he needs to make it happen. You can say you like the look of something without needing that thing, but Cal doesn't think in those terms. She wants something, she must have it. He must be the one to provide it. It's all very cut and dry, quick answers. Jack, on the other hand, well, he's got a family. Things cannot be that quickly determined. He needs to think about providing for a wife and daughter. He's procedural. He's an honest cop. He may not be the best investigator, but he may not be the biggest hero, but he's the good guy, and he wants to do his job well. When something upsets that drive he has, namely his own partner, whom he jokes with early on about going steady with each other, as if they know each other better than the other knows himself, it begins to really destroy Jack. He drinks, he gets angry easily, his world shatters. In some ways, it's like a breakup that you don't see coming, and you're just losing a part of your life that is simply not easy to disconnect yourself from. And I think this movie does a good job at showing these characters on this arc where, yes, Lily does find something she likes being around, even if she isn't entirely thinking about settling down for good. And then these two partners on the force are so different that it both makes them a perfect pair as investigators, but also places them on the razor's edge of it all going sour very quickly. The film critic Judith M. Cass has stated that this movie uses a theme that is not uncommon in Siegel's work, which makes the concept of love being something of an antagonist and creates complications in people's lives instead of shelters for them. I think this is a very good movie that doesn't get as much attention as it probably should, thanks to this being something of a more obscure indie film nowadays. And finally, speaking of indie films, this was made by the Filmmakers Releasing Organization. However, their own company name is not spelled correctly. It only has one M when the word filmmakers has two M's. Also, I'm not sure if this is an extra joke based on their own film production company being misspelled, but the end of the movie says it was made in Hallwood, not made in Hollywood. I guess that was something seen at the end of all of their movies. Alright. I think I've said about all I can say about Private Hell 36. So, Nurse, what's your review?
Well, I was glad we were watching yet another black and white movie for this year. And I was also happy we got another film noir on our show. I think there were some good things in this movie. I can see what you were saying about the movie and what it was doing with the characters, but oh man, I feel like we should have gotten at least one full song from Lily Marlowe. But then again, maybe we shouldn't. She wasn't that great of a singer. The poster kind of misleads with all its talk of living on the edge, of evil and violence, but there wasn't really much of either of those in this movie. So with all that, I have to say that while it isn't that terrible of a movie, it was very slow. Too slow for me. And while Jeff might be a big fan of this movie, I can only give Private Hell 36 a paltry 2 poops out of 5.